Deconstructing Sexual Shame, Chapter 3. Chapter 1 was about how I had a crush on a boy when I was 9. He rejected me, and my mum taught me about penetrative sex when I was about the same age. So it's about sexual development. And then Chapter 2 is about how I uncovered sexual trauma in my young adulthood. When I went to Bible college, actually, around that age of 18, 19. Chapter 3 is called My Menstrual Cycle and Vaginismus. So in this chapter, I share all about how I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I was 14 and a half when I finally menstruated, and so some of my experiences around that were not being sure when my period had started, because at 14 I kind of thought I had seen some blood on the toilet paper and made the mistake of thinking it was my period, and it was not. And then when you actually experience your period coming on, it can be quite, well, it's a lot heavier than a small droplet of blood. It's so I was outside of my house when it came. I was sleeping over my mum's friend's place. So a fully adult, 30-something-year-old woman, when I was 14, what am I saying? And I had to tell her that I've gotten my period for the first time, because if I didn't tell her, obviously I was going to bleed everywhere. I was sleeping at her house, and I needed period products. And it was kind of convenient that I was not with my parents, because I think it would have been embarrassing to tell them for the second time, I think I've got my period, 6 months after telling them the first time. But telling my mum's friend, it was just kind of necessary, and she wasn't embarrassed at all, and she passed on the information to my mum, so I didn't have to. And there's actually a lot of shame, I think, in our society about talking about periods, or maybe shame is not exactly the right word. For some people it is shame, and for some it's just this kind of embarrassment, like nobody wants to admit they've got their period, because there's like a stigma, like, oh, she's going to be moody, she's going to be crampy, she's going to behave certain ways or need certain things because she's on her period. And even if some of those things are true, like even if we're having hormonal changes during our menstrual cycles, why can't we celebrate those things, or talk about those things and be real and honest and authentic, and appreciate one another's journeys and where we're at, and treat this as a normal bodily function for people who have wombs, uteruses, vaginas, those kinds of things. And so then later I'd talk about how I was not allowed to wear tampons when I was a teenager, and didn't want to anyway, because I didn't want to put anything in my vagina. And so my mum had to write a note to the PE teacher to tell her that I would not be participating in swimming lessons because I had my period. And so the teacher essentially announced it to the whole class, everyone should have to wear tampons, making it very obvious that the person who's not in the pool is not wearing a tampon. But instead of finding that embarrassing, I actually was grateful to my mum, and didn't really care if people knew I had my period. I'm like, yeah, so what? Anyway, fast forward a few years, several years, I actually did decide that I wanted to use tampons for the exact reason of going swimming to swim laps, because a doctor told me that I really needed to lose some weight, and he actually recommended that swimming would probably be the best way to do it in order to protect my back while trying to lose weight. So, I lost 66 pounds when I was 22 years old, 22, 23. It took 18 months. but I'm also very tall. So we're talking about 3 dress sizes, not like 10 dress sizes of weight, just a few. Anyway, point being, when I inserted a tampon for the first time because I wanted to go swim to lose weight, I experienced extreme pain. I nearly passed out from like the shock of the pain, like just going, what is going on in my body? And like I remember everything went white, like my eyes went white. I couldn't see because I was like nearly passing out from the pain. And not long after that, I got really angry the same day, really angry. Like, why am I experiencing vaginal pain on this because of a tiny little tampon? Like, they're really small if you compare them to a penis or you compare it to a dildo or whatever. It's this tiny little product. And I was thinking, man, how much more painful would sex be? How much more painful would using a vibrator be if I can't even put in a tampon? I was furious. So by that point, I wasn't really masturbating, or maybe I had once or twice, and wasn't experiencing a ton of pleasure, but it was starting. Like, I was starting to go, touching myself is kind of nice. And I knew what sexual arousal was. So I thought, I'm going to arouse myself to insert a tampon, which worked. I was able to relax and become sexually aroused enough to insert a tampon, to go swimming. I lost weight, like I said. And I did become a masturbator. Hi, everyone, I'm a masturbator. Anyway, that's, I guess, my story about vaginismus and periods, and how I think we should undo the stigma and the shame and the embarrassment around all of those things, and also understand what they are, so that hopefully we can overcome things like vaginismus before we're having sex and finding it extremely painful, because the vagina muscles have tightened up to prohibit entry, because they're afraid. Because for me, it was very much a fear of having sex. I was afraid of rape, and which I mentioned in previous videos, and I was afraid of having consensual sex. Like, I didn't really know that consciously. I thought I desperately wanted to get married and have sex, but unconsciously or subconsciously, I was terrified. So the result was vaginismus, and it took a while to it took what it took to insert a tampon and lose weight and start to recognize that I needed sexual healing, because that all kind of collided, and I started to pray for sexual healing, and I started to work towards sexual healing, which included weight loss for me, because I was shielding, and I say this in my chapter as well, I was shielding myself from consensual sex as well as from rape by keeping the weight on. And I know that that's not the reason, like that doesn't apply to everybody. But for me, part of the reason that I was overweight was literally to protect myself from sex. So that's chapter 3, and I will be back with more about the rest of the chapters very soon.